She wore the same worn shoes every day. She never spoke unless spoken to. They laughed at her, mocked her lunch, called her names behind her back. Nobody knew her father built the very building they worked in. Nobody knew. Until the day the boardroom doors opened and everything changed forever. If you love stories where the quiet ones win in the end, hit subscribe now. Turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. It was a Monday morning in Lagos, the kind of morning where the city moved fast and nobody had time to notice anyone else. Cars honked, vendors shouted. And in the middle of all that noise, a young woman named Folake stepped out of a yellow bus, straightened her plain blue blouse and looked up at the tall glass building in front of her. Obioma Holdings, one of the biggest companies in the country. To everyone else, it was just another office building. To Folake, it was the beginning of something she had waited a long time for. She walked in quietly, her bag hanging over one shoulder, her shoes a little worn at the edges. She did not walk like someone trying to be noticed. She walked like someone trying not to be. At the front desk, she gave her name softly, almost like she was afraid to say it too loud. The security man barely looked up. He pointed her toward the elevator and went back to his phone. And just like that, Folake began her first day as a junior admin assistant. Nobody clapped, nobody welcomed her with a smile. She found her desk in a corner near the printer, a small space that nobody else wanted. She sat down, opened her bag, and pulled out a small notebook. She did not complain, she simply began to work. By midday, she had already noticed something about this office. People here did not look at what a person could do, they looked at what a person wore, how a person spoke, and where a person seemed to come from. And Folake, with her simple clothes and her quiet manner, did not fit what they expected a serious employee to look like. Two women in the office noticed her first. One was named Chinlo, a senior assistant who always wore the newest styles and spoke with a loud, confident voice that filled every room she entered. The other was F, who worked in customer relations but spent more time gathering gossip than doing her actual job. The two of them were close friends, and they had a habit of deciding within minutes who was worth their time and who was not. They decided quickly that Folake was not. It started small. A comment about her shoes said just loud enough for her to hear. A laugh when she brought her lunch to the small kitchen, a modest container of jollof rice that had clearly been packed with care but not with money. F wrinkled her nose and asked if that was the same food from yesterday. Chinlo laughed and said maybe the new girl couldn't afford anything better. Folake said nothing. She simply closed her container, smiled politely, and returned to her desk. She did not fight back, she did not explain herself, and to people like Chinlo and F, silence was not strength. It was an invitation. Over the following days, small humiliations became a pattern. When there was extra work nobody wanted to do, it went to Folake. When a mistake happened that was not her fault, somehow her name was mentioned first. She stayed late to fix things quietly, without complaint, without asking for credit. She never once raised her voice, never once argued back. Some in the office began to whisper that she was strange, too quiet, too humble for someone working in a place like this. They did not understand that her quietness was not weakness. It was patience. It was discipline. It was something deeper that none of them could see yet. Above Chinlo and F sat a man named Mr. Uch, the department manager. He was the kind of boss who believed respect came from fear, not trust. He rarely smiled at his junior staff, and he had a habit of correcting people loudly in front of others, as if the humiliation itself was part of the lesson. He noticed Folake early on, not because of her mistakes but because she did not respond the way he expected. She did not shrink when he raised his voice. She simply nodded, said yes sir, and continued her work. One morning during a general staff meeting, Mr. Uch used Folake as an example of what he called the wrong kind of employee. He told the room that some people were simply not built for corporate life, that some people moved too slowly, thought too simply, and did not understand the pressure of real business. He did not say her name directly, but everyone in that room knew exactly who he meant because his eyes stayed fixed on her the entire time. A few people laughed nervously. Chinlo smirked. F whispered something to the woman beside her. Folake sat still, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes lowered, not from shame, but from the discipline of someone who had learned long ago not to give people the reaction they were hoping for. That evening, she went home to a small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was modest, clean, and quiet, much like her. Inside, her mother lay resting on a worn couch, her health fragile, her breathing slow. Folake knelt beside her, adjusted her blanket, and gently placed a hand on her forehead. She whispered that everything was fine at work, that she was learning a lot, that things would get better soon. Her mother smiled weakly and told her she was proud of her. What nobody in that office knew, what nobody could have imagined, was that Folake had grown up in a very different world than the one she now quietly moved through. There had been a time when she lived in a large house with high ceilings and marble floors, when cars waited for her outside gates, when her name alone opened doors. But she had asked to leave that world behind, at least for a while. She wanted to know what it felt like to build something with her own hands, to be judged by her own work, not by the weight of her father's name. Her phone rang quietly one evening and she stepped outside to answer it. Her voice softened as she spoke. "Yes, Papa, I'm fine, work is going well. No, don't come yet. I asked you to give me time, remember?" She listened for a while, nodded even though he could not see her, and then spoke again, gently but firmly. "I promise if it becomes too much, I will tell you, but please let me try this my way first." She ended the call and stood outside for a moment, looking up at the night sky, breathing slowly, gathering the strength to return to a job that gave her very little kindness in return. Back at the office, the atmosphere grew heavier for her with each passing week. Chinlo found new ways to take credit for tasks Folake had quietly completed. When a report Folake had stayed up all night preparing was presented to senior management, it was Chinlo who stood in front of the room, smiling proudly, taking every word of praise as if it were her own. Folake sat at the back, saying nothing, her jaw tight but her expression calm. Meanwhile grew bolder with her rumors. One afternoon, a small box of office supplies went missing from the storage room. Within an hour, a rumor had spread that Folake had been seen near that room earlier that day. Nobody had proof. Nobody had seen anything solid. But the story moved fast, the way stories about quiet people often do, filling in gaps with assumptions instead of facts. Folake was called into the Human Resources office. A woman named Bissy, kind but overwhelmed with her own workload, sat across from her and explained the accusation. Folake listened calmly, her hands folded, and simply said that she had not taken anything, that she had been at her desk the entire afternoon. Bissy nodded, told her they would look into it, but the damage was already done. Whispers followed Folake through the hallways for days. People who barely knew her now looked at her with suspicion. Even people who had never spoken a single word to her felt comfortable repeating the rumor as if it were fact. That evening, Folake did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She found an empty stairwell, sat down on the cold steps and cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears, the kind that come from carrying too much for too long without anyone noticing the weight. She thought about her mother's illness, about the medical bills piling up, about how badly she wanted to prove she could stand on her own, and about how unfair it felt that kindness was being repaid with cruelty. But after a few minutes, she wiped her face, took a deep breath, and stood up. She reminded herself why she had started this journey, and she reminded herself that truth, given enough time, always finds its way to the surface. A few days later, news moved through the office like electricity through wire. The founder and chief executive of Obioma Holdings, a man known simply as Mr. Obioma, was returning from a long trip abroad, and he was coming to inspect the office personally. Panic spread instantly. Desks were cleaned. Reports were reprinted. Chinlo rehearsed a version of events where she was the hardworking star of the department. Mr. Uch walked around barking orders, suddenly polite to everyone, suddenly nervous in a way nobody had seen from him before. Folake, strangely, seemed the calmest person in the entire building. She continued her work as she always did, steady and quiet, while everyone around her rushed and panicked. At one point her phone buzzed. She stepped aside to answer it, and again only her side of the conversation could be heard. "Yes, Papa, I'm fine." No, please don't make a big entrance. Let me handle this my own way. I promised you I would tell you if things got too hard, and I'm telling you now it has been hard, but I'm still standing. Just let me finish this the right way." She hung up, took a slow breath, and returned to her desk as if nothing unusual had happened. But something inside her had shifted. She felt, for the first time in weeks, like the weight she had been carrying was about to be set down. The next morning, the entire office stood a little straighter than usual. Everyone wore their best clothes. Everyone rehearsed their best smiles. Mr. Uch stood near the entrance, ready to greet the CEO the moment he arrived. Chinlo stood beside him, practicing her introduction under her breath. F adjusted her hair for the 10th time, glancing nervously toward the elevator. When the elevator doors finally opened, a tall, well-dressed man stepped out, flanked by 2 assistants. The room went silent. Mr. Uch extended his hand immediately, his voice suddenly warm and eager. But Mr. Obioma barely looked at him. His eyes were scanning the room, searching for someone, and then he found her. He walked past Mr. Uch's outstretched hand, past Chinlo's rehearsed smile, past every carefully prepared greeting, and walked straight toward the small desk near the printer. Folake stood slowly, her eyes widening slightly, and before she could say a word, her father wrapped his arms around her and held her close. "My daughter," he said, loud enough for the entire office to hear, "I am so proud of you." The room froze, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Chinlo's smile disappeared completely. F's mouth fell open. Mr. Uch's outstretched hand slowly lowered to his side, his face draining of color as the truth settled over him like a heavy stone. The quiet woman they had mocked, embarrassed, and accused, the woman whose lunch they had laughed at, whose shoes they had judged, whose silence they had mistaken for weakness, was the daughter of the man who owned the entire company. Mr. Obioma turned to face the room, his arm still resting gently around his daughter's shoulder. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice was calm, steady, and firm, the voice of a man who had built an empire not through anger but through discipline and truth. He explained simply that months ago his daughter had come to him with a request. She did not want special treatment. She did not want her name to open doors for her. She wanted to work like everyone else, to learn the business from the ground, to earn respect through her own effort rather than through her family's position. He had agreed on one condition, that he would quietly check on her from time to make sure she was safe. He looked around the room slowly, his eyes settling briefly on Mr. Uch, then on Chinlo, then on F. "I did not come today to punish anyone in anger," he said. "I came to see the truth with my own eyes, and now I have seen it clearly." Mr. Uch opened his mouth to explain himself, but no words came out. Chinlo's hands trembled at her sides. F stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Mr. Obioma continued, his voice steady. "In this company we say we value hard work, we say we value respect. But respect only means something when you give it to people who cannot reward you for it and who cannot punish you for withholding it. My daughter came here with nothing but her effort, and she was mocked for it. That tells me something is broken here, something deeper than one bad report or one missing box of supplies." He paused, letting his words settle over the silent room. "Effective today, changes will be made, Mr. Uch was informed, calmly but firmly, that his position as department manager was being reviewed, and that he would be moved to a role with far less authority over others until he demonstrated a real change in how he treated the people beneath him. Chinlo and F were called forward. And in front of the same room where they had once laughed at Folake, they were told plainly what had happened, how their words had spread as fact without proof, and how close they had come to costing an innocent woman her reputation and her job. For a moment, it seemed like the room was waiting for something even harsher, some dramatic punishment to close the story the way people often expect these moments to end. But Folake, still standing beside her father, spoke for the first time since he had arrived. "Papa," she said gently, "may I say something?" He nodded, stepping back slightly to let her speak. She looked at Chinlo, then at F, then finally at Mr. Uch. Her voice was soft, but there was no trace of fear in it anymore. "I'm not asking for anyone to lose everything," she said. I know what it feels like to be judged unfairly, and I don't want to become someone who does the same thing to others, even if they deserve it. What I ask is that they be given a chance to understand what they did and a real chance to change it. Not because they've earned it yet, but because everyone deserves the opportunity to become better than they were yesterday. The room was silent again, but this silence felt different. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of people realizing they had misjudged someone completely, not just her position, but her character. Mr. Obioma looked at his daughter with quiet pride, then turned back to the room. "You heard her," he said. "She has more grace than most people twice her age. Let that be the second lesson you take from today." In the weeks that followed, the office slowly began to change. Mr. Uch, humbled in a way he had never experienced before, began speaking differently to his staff, correcting mistakes with patience instead of public shame. Chinlo, forced to confront how easily she had judged someone based on appearance, became noticeably quieter, more thoughtful before she spoke about others. F stopped spreading stories she had not confirmed for herself, choosing instead to ask questions before assuming the worst. Folake did not leave the company, and she did not accept a position simply because of her father's name. She continued working quietly and diligently until months later she was promoted to a junior management role, not because of who her father was, but because of the reports she had written, the problems she had solved, and the calm, steady way she had handled herself even when the people around her gave her every reason to give up. Her mother's health slowly improved with proper care, and on the evenings Folake came home from work, she no longer carried the same heaviness she once did. She still wore simple clothes. She still packed her own lunch. But now, people in the office greeted her differently, not because they were afraid of her father, but because they had learned the hard way what true strength actually looks like. And that is the heart of this story. Somewhere in every office, every school, every gathering of people, there is a quiet person who seems easy to overlook. Someone whose clothes are simple, whose voice is soft, whose lunch is humble. It is easy to assume that quietness means weakness, that simplicity means a person has nothing to offer. But so often that quiet person is carrying more strength, more patience, and more character than anyone around them realizes. Never judge a person by their shoes, their silence, or their seat at the table. You never know who they truly are, what they've been through, or what they are capable of becoming. Kindness costs nothing, but the lack of it can cost everything. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more like it. Share it with someone who needs this lesson today. See you in the next story.